Now, uh, I got to where's my share screen? It's not showing up. Here we go. Uh, all right, do you see my PowerPoint?
No, there we do. Yes.
Yep, there it is.
Okay. And okay, this is our fourth lecture on energy, environment, and economics in Southern Oregon, OLLI. Hello to everybody. And what we're going to talk about today is human cultural evolution. Now, evolution doesn't mean simply what we talked about before about the changing in the physical and physiological aspects of humans. It means all evolution means is slow change or gradual change. And of great importance for humans is what we call cultural evolution, that we don't have to wait for our genes to change, which is a relatively slow process, but cultural evolution can happen very quickly. And that's been incredibly important to humans. And of course, it's all what child rearing and so forth is about, is passing on cultural differences that are called not genes, but memes. I don't know where the word came from. MEMES. And so cultural evolution has meant that humans can change much more rapidly than was the case over the last millions of years. And it's had profound impact, of course, on who we are and how we live, how we make our living, and so forth. So, my view is, in summary, that human cultural evolution is principally the story of how humans started harnessing more and more energy. Now, I don't think that's a viewpoint that's widely shared, but I will make my case. It comes back to the very first thing I said in this class, which was we don't think about, we're not taught about energy, I think, properly in our schooling. We're taught about energy in the physics lab or one or two lectures here and there in chemistry or biology or ecology, but we're not taught about how fundamental it is. And I just gave an example of how I think about energy when I'm doing the dishes. Hot water has more energy than cold water. Detergent is an emulsifying agent that works on chemical bonds attracting each other. So you're attracting the food particles off of your dishes and so forth. So the idea is that all that we are and all that we do is related to energy. Now, it doesn't mean energy is the only thing, but energy is usually a component of each thing. And we only have so much energy resources, speaking as an organism. If you think about a tree growing in your backyard or whatever, that tree is making decisions. In a sense, now it doesn't have a neural system like we do, of course, but it has plant hormones and so forth that are genetically engineered to make decisions. And the tree is getting signals. It's getting signals. Hey, I'm being shaded over here. I need to grow taller, or I need to spread my branches out, or whatever. I need to spread my branches out into this hole I found where there's lots of sunlight. Or a root will say, "Hey, I'm not getting enough nutrients. My tree is not getting enough nutrients. I have to grow further." That's how roots get more nutrients as they grow. That takes energy. Or, hey, a leaf will say, "There's a bug chewing on me. I need more chemical defenses." Well, so the tree, by means we don't really understand, but it's clearly doing this, is making decisions. Okay, the most important one right now is we're not getting enough nutrients. And so I'm going to take my energy reserves and put it into growing the roots. That's my priority at the moment, or things like that. Well, all of life subconsciously is going through these energy decisions. I think that's really an amazing thing, and we need to think about that more. Okay, so with respect to humans, energy is obviously food, the plants and animals that we harvest. And I showed you examples of, for example, the coon hunters that had to invest a lot of energy into getting their antelopes. It took three people working hard for a whole day, but when they got a big kudu, they got lots of food. So people were hunters and gatherers for many thousands of times longer than we were farmers. So here are some important energy changes, energy evolutionary changes. Fire, the most important thing about fire is it allowed access to more foods. Plant materials have cell walls. Plant cells have walls, animal cells do not. And cell walls are harder for us to digest. How do we deal with that? We do that by cooking.
Yeah, hello, Georgia.
And so humans learn
Hi,
how to
Georgia. You're
cook.
looking for the breakers?
Bob, I think you got your mic on. Um, and so so fire allowed us access to many more foods and to be closer to the
Oh,
base of the food chain. Tools that have edges or points.
as long as we didn't set off the fire alarm, I think
Bob,
we're
would you
okay.
turn off your mic? Bob,
Yeah,
Bob,
I think, yeah. So you, sorry, yeah. It was, did you find it in the
Bob,
kitchen, right?
turn
Okay.
off
Bob,
your mic.
Did you find the breakers for the
Can you
library in
turn
the
them?
kitchen?
I don't know how to turn them off.
Richard as co-host might be able to mute.
Um,
You click, I
Yeah.
think if you
I
click on the
could,
three
Right.
but I'm
dots.
not co-host
And
yet.
then one's for the
You could,
library. I think
you can
the
also
kitchen,
click
but
on the
I think it's
participant, and as co-host, you can mute him.
oh,
Right,
okay.
but I have to be made
All
co-host.
right.
I'm still
Yeah.
not co-host.
Charles, can you make Richard a
I
co-host?
just did it. I got him.
Okay.
Okay.
Honestly.
So these tools, like a spear, is an energy concentrating device, allowed the human to do a lot more work. Uh, and this, all of this gave humans an increasing ability to exploit more resources over time. Agriculture, of course, was especially important. And but the energy surplus did not particularly go into more wealth for each individual because it just meant more humans. And that led to more environmental impacts, which we'll talk about today. So there was a certain sense, a negative feedback. Negative feedback doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it reduces the process. So more environmental impacts like soil erosion, reduced agricultural production, ultimately reduce the number of humans in a region, and all of that is global history. But the net effect was an expansion of humans on the planet, and here we are, 8 billion of us, an amazing number. Okay, this today's lecture is going to explore some particular topics
We're super busy.
of
you on a couple of things.
Is somebody else talking,
Yeah,
please?
Richard, can you please mute everybody who's not muted?
I'm
except
not
Charles?
co-host yet. I can't mute anybody until I'm co-host.
He says he made you a co-host.
Well, it's not working because I
Does anybody know
tried to do
who's
things
talking?
and I can't do it.
Okay.
Can you tell Charles how to mute
Yeah.
somebody?
I can do it, but I don't know who's talking.
You can see a little red thing in the bottom of everybody's square that shows they're muted, and those who
Uh-huh.
don't have that are not muted. So there's somebody named S, and there's somebody named Max, and there's a David.
All right. Yes, I see. Good.
And
Good
there's someone
eyesight.
named Chris as well.
Who's telling me this? You're doing a good job.
Elaine. This is Elaine.
Where there will be a lot of people.
These
Extra
apparently are muted. I don't know who else is not muted.
S, somebody with just S.
for an event at the ball. Period.
And then
We will also
Maya Mac,
on Saturday,
my iMac.
16th. Period. If you could please let Jeremy
There
know.
should be a button to mute all other participants
Doing our
as
best.
as the host.
From it,
should
to
be.
building to park in other places.
I don't know where that button is. I'd
We
love
have
to have it.
magnetic
I think if you click on participants in the lower section of the window, of the Zoom window,
Oh, Christ. Excuse me. Well, it seems to be. Do you know where there's a mute all button? Do you know how to reach it? No, I'm having trouble with people talking.
I didn't see that you had responded to Dee's email about times to get together.
So it's coming from my iMac person. Could you mute, please, my iMac?
For the meeting.
There. Okay, that's fixed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elaine, for your help. And I apologize to everybody, but it was not my fault. Okay, let's look at what we're going to talk about today. Human specific topics was exploration and colonization, and all of these, remember, are going to be from energy. Hadley cells, impacts of colonization, formation of fossil fuels, exploitation of fossil fuels, coal in the Industrial Revolution, oil is nature's premium fuel, and origin of modern oil industry, which is not Pennsylvania, but Ontario. Okay, human cultural evolution is about increasing energy surpluses. The first person really to say this was the sociologist Leslie White. And he took a lot of crap from his colleagues who didn't like his physical, they would say, deterministic perspective of human culture. And people who are in my camp still have a bit of this conflict with people who think in terms of human culture, and in particularly neoclassical, that means the regular economists who think that there is no limits or restrictions to human ingenuity, and don't think of human as being constrained by resources. I think we see in today's news that humans indeed are quite constrained by resources, but we'll talk about that later. So Leslie White was a really important thinker in this way, and anybody who wants to dig into this, it's great to go back and read in the 1940s and 50s Leslie White. Now, the biggest problem humans faced physically with this new exploitation of farming, as we moved from hunters and gatherers, that is just taking nature as it was, to changing nature to what we wanted through farming, was farming had the problem of nutrient loss, as I talked about last time, with the picture of the nutrients coming out with the harvest and the shallow roots of agricultural crops compared to natural vegetation. And the most common way people dealt with it, and it's still dealing with it, it might feed 5 to 10% of people in the world today, is shifting cultivation. And we think of shifting cultivation as something in the tropics, and indeed it is, but my mother was from South Carolina, and they used shifting cultivation in South Carolina when my mother was young. And they still use shifting cultivation in Finland today. So it's not necessarily a tropical phenomenon, but it's been most studied in the tropics. And here's pictures from Latin America of most of where I've spent a lot of time in my life of people undertaking shifting cultivation. So the first step is clearing the site, and a machete is the common tool. And this would leave, this obviously bigger ones require an axe. This would leave an area of drying vegetation. And undertaking this process actually is something that requires a great deal of skill. And so here we have the vegetation drying. And so you have to cut the trees in front of the dry season, let them dry, and then burn the vegetation. And this turns the nutrients that were in the vegetation are 3% nutrients. If you don't know what nutrients are, go to your hardware store and look for a bag of NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the main nutrients, or there are minor nutrients also, and you get that in what's it called, Nutrigrow. I think there's commercial products that have every conceivable member of the periodic table that plants need at least a tiny bit of, and they're in the proportions that the plants need, and that means most importantly nitrogen. Nitrogen other than carbon. Carbon's in the air and the CO2, but the nitrogen comes from the soil, and so that's the most important nutrient that the plants need. This leaves behind a nutrient-rich ash. That's fertilizer. And that, for most of human history, has been our main source of fertilizer, nutrients from burning vegetation. And then people come along, you see, with a seed bag on his side and what's called a dibble stick. It's just a stick with a point, and they put the seeds in here. And this kind of agriculture evolved independently, culturally evolved independently in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. All of them use essentially the same technology for much of their food growing. And then from that, you can get a good crop. Here is typical of the Americas, is what are called the Three Sisters by many Native Americans. And what you have here is maize, which produces the most, it's a very productive plant. Most of what we eat as humans, maybe 90% on the earth, is cereal crops. Cereal crops are which means mostly corn, rice, or What am I missing here? Corn, rice, or
Beans.
no, not beans.
Wheat.
Wheat,
Wheat. Thank you. Um, they're cereal crops, and they're what are called C4 plants, which are a genetic change in many plants, well, mostly cereal plants, that result in high yields. So maize typically has 2 or 3 or 5 times higher yield than anything else. Now, the three sisters include maize or corn. We call it corn in beans, and so you plant pole beans next to your corn, and the beans grow up. I think that's bean there. The beans grow up using the maize as a pole, and beans have the unique characteristic, well, beans and other legumes, of pulling nitrogen out of the air and enriching the maize, because maize requires a lot of a lot of nitrogen. And also we have squash, and squash have prickly leaves, and it discourages many animals. So, and plus you get squash. So these so-called three sisters are very typical of the Americas, and this is a good yield from shifting cultivation. And so when you fly over much of the tropics, you see here in roughly 1 hectare, that 1 hectare is 2.5 acres, roughly 1 hectare plots of, here we have virgin or mature anyway vegetation, and an area that was cut just this year and it hasn't been planted yet, or the plants haven't grown up. And this might be from last year or 2 or 3 years ago, and this from maybe 4 years ago. You see, and they're different plots, and then you can even see maybe 8 or 10 year old plots here and here. So people just shift from the place they do the vegetation, do this process of cutting, drying, and burning, planting, harvesting for 1 or 2 years, and then abandonment and letting the forest grow back, and the forest replenish the nutrients. So we may go back to that. We'll see about that. Now, agriculture then spread around much of the world, and you can tell where the agriculture is by going to a lake and taking what's called a core, which means you just shove a pipe down in the mud, and then you look at the different species in the pollen. And so you see the way back, there was no grass before 4200 BC. It was all various kinds of forest trees. And then we came clearance and farming, and you get a big pulse of grass seeds. And then you might have a recovery of the forest, and then clearance again. They're often long-term cycles over 1,000 years. This has been shown by Perlin, for example, for Greece and for Spain. They've had areas of massive deforestation, farming collapse, and then growing again. So here's farming. Bruegel does marvelous paintings in Belgium of people in their farmed area, and you can see it. This looks like probably barley and pretty good yield. And the people are out there and they're having lunch of typically bread, and this guy's exhausted, sleeping, and his cod piece is barely hanging in there. And everybody, I guess they're eating porridge of some kind and drinking it. And uh, uh, this is a very typical scene of what our near ancestors did. And here are various old recreations of humans undertaking various agricultural activities. I don't know exactly what people are doing in each of these cases, but they're planting and clearing and raising animals. And the nobles, of course, are doing no work at all, riding around on their horse and hunting with the hawk, I suppose. But most of the people are right here. We're threshing wheat or barley. This guy's planting. This guy's, I guess, stomping grapes. This guy's knocking acorns out of the tree for the pigs who are looking on expectantly. And then here he's cutting the throat of a pig and getting ready. I don't know what's going on exactly here, but here's what your ancestors mostly did. And probably for most of us, our ancestors weren't riding a horse with a hawk. Okay, now the problem with permanent agriculture like this would wear out the soil. And this was especially well understood in England and Germany. So England had big commissions on studying this, and they went and dug up the bones of the dead horses and soldiers from the Battle of Waterloo and ground them up and used the remnants to fertilize their quote unquote tired fields. The problem England found was they didn't have enough manure. They understood that manure could regenerate agricultural land, but they didn't have enough of it. Then an important thing in Germany was this guy, Justus Liebig, came up with Liebig's law of the minimum, that what would limit the growth of plants was the nutrient that was there least relative to the demands of the organism. That typically was nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. In other words, if your field was not yielding well, if the yield, the tons of yield per hectare was going down over time, you didn't have to add all the nutrients. You only had to add the one that was least relative to the demands of the organism. And there's something called Redfield ratios that tells what the demand is relative to what the organism has. And this is typically, you need about 18 times more nitrogen than phosphorus. I don't know what the ratio is for potassium. And you need about 18 units of nitrogen for 100 units of carbon. So you can figure out, if you're a good chemist, what your field does. And that's, of course, very much what agricultural experimental stations and university extension do for farmers, is they figure out which nutrient you need. Now, with agriculture came something else that people were not particularly aware of. But by studying ancient bones, I heard this guy once, Larry Angel, a marvelous lecture. And there was a decline in general health, and agricultural lifestyle was not nearly as healthy for us as hunter-gatherer lifestyles. And for one thing, we got a lot less protein, which is nitrogen, and it led to a rise in infectious diseases. We had high mortality in youth. A lot of this had to do with population density, increased crowding, and diseases spread more readily. And nutritional stress, malnutrition, and you can see that in the teeth of Larry Angel of old skeletons. Porotic hyperostosis. I don't even know what that is, but that's a disease situation. And incidentally, the stature of people in Anatolia, for example, the area between Greece and Turkey, which is Greek or guess depending who you ask. You find in the bones that the people before, well, the hunter-gatherer people had as large a stature as the people that live there now, 5'8" or something like that. But during the strictly agricultural area until modern nutrition, they were considerably smaller. Their bones were shorter. And so it also showed that cultivation labor resulted in increased stress on the human body. Remember, we talked about the Kung as the original affluent society where they had large affluence that they used for telling stories and playing with their children and social interactions, but that the Neolithic, meaning this new Stone Age, which is the early agriculture areas, showed that cultivating the land appeared to increase the stress on the human body, including changes in bone density and stature. So agriculture wasn't all good. Okay, now the next big energy assessment we had to do with migration of humans. And this has been studied in a very interesting book by Jared Diamond I used to use in my freshman course called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Some of you probably found that. And he said that crops and animals moved much more easily east-west than north-south because you had so many different climate zones where it was very difficult to move an animal that was used to one climate into another through a rain, or the Americas for that matter. So going from a steppe in Argentina to a steppe in Saskatchewan, you have to go through a tropical rainforest, and that would be a lot more difficult. Okay, now wind was a tremendous energy source once we figured out how to exploit it. And the Portuguese, at the time of Columbus, more or less, remember Columbus was trained in Portugal. He was hired by Spain, but he was trained in Portugal. The Portuguese were working their way down the coast of Africa. And we're going to come back to this, but the voyage was very difficult. And the first guy to figure out how to do this was called Prince Henry the Navigator, who actually didn't navigate very much himself, but he created a school for navigation. And if you've ever been to Lisbon, which I have, go to the Maritime Museum. It is fascinating. It's just marvelous. But anyway, Prince Henry was the guy who basically figured out how to navigate. He sponsored expeditions that went down the western coast of Africa. Now, an important thing about Portuguese sailors that stood them in good steed for a long time was they invented a boat called a caravel, the Nina Pinta and the Santa Maria. The Nina and Pinta were caravels, and they were relatively small but very, very seaworthy boats. And that was because the Portuguese had to deal with the stormy Atlantic. And so they had oak ribs. So oak was a lot more expensive and more difficult to work with than was pine, but it's how you made a strong boat. And that's why the Portuguese had a start on everything. And the second thing is they had lateen sails for maneuverability. And that becomes important when you're going down the coast of Africa originally, because as I'm going to show you, you're sailing into the winds. Let me show you how important this was. Well, just a second. This led, of course, to later enormous ships, mostly square rigged. See, this is a lateen fore and aft rig, and this is a square rig. And the square rigs could sail very well if the wind was behind you. But if you had to go into the wind, that is tack, then the fore and aft sails, the lateen sails, were much better. That's why contemporary sailboats are mostly fore and aft of this sort. Now, this led to soldiers going to all over the world, coming and meeting native folks at different parts of the world, and the spreading of Christianity. All of these things were mixed up, but they first had to understand how to do the energy of this. And we'll show you the problem. Our winds come mostly from the west. They're westerlies. Tropical winds come mostly from the east. So this is both north of the equator and south of the equator. See, the winds are, why is this? What is going on? Why are there main patterns of winds like this? Okay. Well, to show you the importance of this, it took the Mayflower, brought some of my ancestors over, 10 weeks to sail from England to Massachusetts. 10 weeks, but only 3 weeks to sail back. Think of that. It was a miserable, lots of people died going from England to Massachusetts. The reason is they're going from England here to Massachusetts, whoa, way down here, they're going right into the wind. And the Mayflower was basically a fore and aft rigged ship. So it's very good at going with the wind, but is not a good tacker. So the key to understanding this is that the Earth is a giant heat engine. And this is the guy who figured it out, George Hadley. He was an English lawyer, but also amateur meteorology. And he lived from 1685 to 1768. And I think it's just marvelous how he figured this out. And now I'm going to tell you. Okay. Now the sun is over here on the left. This is the equator. Now you can test this yourself with what's called the photon flux density. That's how many photons are the little energy packets, we don't quite know what they are, coming from the sun. If you hold your hand straight up to the sun, perpendicular to the sun, so the sun's rays hit that straight on, just do this on a sunny afternoon at noon, and it's warm, and you turn your hand away, and you can feel it get cooler and cooler until then you don't feel it at all. The sun is coming straight at me, but so the angle with which the Earth hits the sun will determine the photon flux density. So because the equator is where the photon flux density is highest, and that's where the most heat is created on the Earth's surface. And that heat expands the air, which means it's less dense. It rises into the atmosphere, and as it rises, it cools, and the water that's in it declines. So if I use when I look at the weather conditions coming at me, I use, I can't think of the name of it at the moment, but the system I use has something called a wonder map. And it shows the patterns of cloudiness anywhere on the earth. And you can see this band of cloud that forms in the late afternoon in the tropics, and it's quite marvelous. You can see this from a satellite or from radar very readily. Now, when this air rises, it creates a high pressure zone about 5 miles high above the equator. And the air is now cool. Most of the water is dropped out. And that high pressure at altitude pushes the air masses north and south. And it descends at 30 degrees, where it warms and goes towards the equator. Here's another picture of it. So now the sun is straight above. The equatorial area is low pressure because the air has been moved up. It's high pressure where it all piles into. It moves north and south, and then it declines and goes towards the equator. This also declines and goes towards the equator. And so this creates rain on the equator and very dry areas, because this warm, dry area sucks the water out of the land. And so the world's deserts, they're at 30 degrees north and south, mostly, and in the middle of continents. And so these are the main patterns on the Earth's surface, that the winds are going to the equator. But there's one more thing George Hadley figured out. It's the spin of the Earth takes this this air masses that's going towards the equator. The equator is actually spinning into this land because it's 25,000 miles around at the equator, but only 18,000 miles around at 30 degrees north. So the Earth, the moving air keeps with it the momentum from where it was at 30 degrees, and the net result is it causes these winds to come from the east and blow to the west. And the westerlies, then, there's a second cell up here, not quite as strong, called a Ferrel cell, and that same process causes our winds to come from the west. And if you're a fly fisherman, as I have often been down in Argentina, and you want to fish upstream, which I like to do, you're always in the roaring 40s, and you're always dealing with winds that are blowing at 40 or 50 miles an hour in your face, making casting very difficult. Okay, so what then Prince Henry, or actually the people that came after him with the knowledge of George Hadley, figured out was the way to get from Europe to the Americas was to go south and enter the trade winds, go with the trade winds over to the West Indies, back up with the southwesterlies, go back up, and then go over to Europe. Now, this resulted in a very cruel, basic economy where the Europeans came down to Africa, got slaves, bought them from other black people, mostly, but encouraged the whole process, took slaves over to the West Indies, to South America, which incidentally got even more slaves than the U.S., and then back to Charleston, where half my genes come from, where they were sold in slave markets for the southern United States. So these basic energy patterns, how to move a ship resulted in all kinds of social consequences and still do. So here's an overview of the winds of the earth. And here we are in Oregon, getting westerlies mostly. And then all of this resulted in huge social consequences, the clash of cultures. And here we have some Europeans, possibly, well, this looks like pre-Lewis and Clark. Certainly in my hometown, there were conflicts of this sort in Massachusetts, but it happened a long time ago. And sometimes it was peaceful. Originally, it was mostly peaceful, but as more and more Europeans came, and many of them broke treaties and mistreated the natives and sometimes the converse. And boom, this is the native populations of Mexico have been figured out. And the most important impact of humans was not the gun and the sword, but disease. And the Europeans had lived with smallpox and cholera and all kinds of diseases and had at least a moderate amount of resistance, and the natives just did not. And so there was initially a huge die-off of the Native Americans. And okay, now I'm going to shift from wind to wood. The best analysis of the role of wood in human history is John Perlin's A Forest Journey, marvelous book. And here's an old picture of from an English woodcut. And just to show you what this meant, this is Indiana, same place in Indiana. In 50 years, it transferred from being heavily forested with small clearings. Humans needed the clearings to grow their crops to a mostly cleared environment that we still have. And solar energy was increasingly captured by crops, which went to the mouths of human or their animals, or now to their automobiles as ethanol that we're all forced to buy. Now, just showing how industrial processes increased the ability of humans to do work, just say the size of their muscles. Here is a man pushing a lever, might use maybe 5% of 1 horsepower. Horse can generate 1 horsepower, I suppose, more or less. An early water mill, I don't know what Vitruvian means, but that's from someplace, were 3 to 8 horsepower. So that was 600 years ago. Watt's early steam engine could generate 40 horsepower. By 1900, we could make 8,000 horsepower, and a coal-fired or a nuclear power plant can generate 1.5 million horsepower. That's an enormous difference in the energy we have to do whatever we do. The Industrial Revolution started with coal, which was mostly mined underground. And you see they're putting the coal pieces, they're breaking them up and putting them on this little wagon and taking them over to this lift and lifting them up to the surface. Women also did this, and as did children. Children were very valuable because they could go into help mine out small seams thin seams of coal. The coal were in seams that basically depended upon how long the time was that it was in swamps versus in other geological formations. Okay, the Industrial Revolution was started with the Newcomen engine, and at that time, the coal mines were flooding. They would have this enormous amount of water that that would go down into the mines and was making it more and more difficult. So the solution to this initially was the Newcomen engine. So the principle of the Newcomen engine is to make steam, and you've got a valve here. So here you're burning coal and you're making steam. You're putting the coal underneath water. You're making steam. The steam goes in and pushes the piston. Originally, the piston would be pushed up, and they'd turn off the steam valve and turn on the cold water valve, and the cold water would come in and condense the steam. It would take up 1/800th the volume, and the atmosphere would push the piston down in the cylinder, and that would lift the pump, which would lift the water. So this was quite clever for the time, and this saved England's coal mines. And England was the first great industrial power, and they were making a huge amount of money on that. Now, let's see. I think I can make this work. Then James Watt came along and was very clever. And what he did was he got the piston. Here's the piston that does the work down below, the gray. And the blue is cold and the red is hot. And you see he has a lever here that diverts the steam to where it's needed. So here's steam, and now it's not, and here's steam. Now the steam's on the other side. So you see he's got the steam pushing the piston back and forth, and that's led to the modern steam engine. And what a difference this made. Now, this is obviously a pretty well-developed steam engine, but you can see this lever here is activating the back and forth clicker that takes steam from one side of the piston to the other, and then all what does is exit the exhaust steam out to the atmosphere, and that allowed the engine to go back and forth. You see here is the main piston that's doing the work, but this is the activator being run by a second push rod that switches the steam back and forth. And this made an enormous difference. And here's one of Watt's first engines. Here's the piston, and this is a device to move the steam from one side to another. This is a ball regulator that would make it run at the speed you wanted. Now, the steam engine became so important that it was used to weave cloth. And this enormously expanded our ability to weave cloth. Now, this is interesting. Now, some things you should look at. Look at the gears that are open and the billowy dresses that these ladies are wearing, and the clothes this guy has too, big sleeves and stuff. Workers lost a lot of arms and legs and lives in the gears. And they're very powerfully turning gears run by a steam engine somewhere else off to the side. And look at these straps that are transferring power from overhead down to the weaving mills. They're made almost universally from buffalo skins, bison skins from the American West. So lots of things were being determined by this. And of course, you needed cloth. And where did the cloth come from? Well, it came from cotton. Once Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, this required lots of human labor to do a very unpleasant job because the cotton plants are prickly. And this instituted American slavery. Well, it was there for other reasons. And so the energy of coal led to the invention of steam engines that led to the development of textile mills, which led to slavery. And this is how we pick cotton today. No one person in a very comfortable cab. So things have changed. Now here's an early steam engine. I probably should have put in there. You see the steam engine is racing the horse. Didn't take too long till a steam engine was winning most of the time. And horrific health and social conditions in British cities. All of these things that I've listed and many, many more. And crowding. Here are the coal fields in England. And I'm going backwards. And then along came Stanley Jevons. Stanley Jevons is one of my heroes. An imperfect hero, as we'll see later, but he wrote I'm going to tell you a story. So Queen Victoria advisors concluded that coal is really important. We need to study it. So they said, well, who knows the most in England about things in general? And they decided it was Stanley Jevons. So they gave essentially a grant to Stanley Jevons and said, I want you to study coal. Just go and study it. Here's a bunch of money. And so he did, and he came back in 2 years and he said, well, I've discovered, and he wrote this all down. I've discovered that all economic activity in England, and this was 1850, goes back to coal. Even the sailboat gets pulled out of, a fishing sailboat gets pulled out of the harbor by a coal burning tug. And coal is everywhere. And then he said, I've looked at all the coal fields and calculated, and he did this in the English system. The metric system would be tough enough, but the English system with feet and inches, but he did it in tons and so forth. He calculated all the coal that there was in England. And he said, at the rate we're growing in our use of coal, we're gonna run out of coal. And this was how much the dark area, how much we'd used so far, but how much it would be if we continued an exponential growth. And he said, in 200 years, we'll run out of coal. He said, England's been around for a lot more than 200 years. And so he's concerning the progress of the nation and the probable exhaustion of our coal mines. That's published in 1866. I've had a second edition of this book, took it out of the Syracuse University Library, and it was published in 1870, I think. And it had the old system where people's names were on the flyer that had taken out the book, and the book had been taken out 3 or 4 times a decade since 1870, and still being taken out or even more, 5 or 10 times a decade in the 2000s when I took a look at it. So the Queen Victoria's advisor says, "Well, Stanley," and so Stanley said, "So we need to do something about this." And so they said, "Stanley, go back and study the problem for another year and come back with what we should do about it." And he came back and he said, "Well, we got to get more efficient." But when he looked at even going way back to the Newcomen engine, which used most of its energy, this one used most of its energy in heating and cooling the container instead of driving the piston, and watts was much more efficient. He said, we got to make it more efficient. But then he comes up with Jevon's paradox, Jevon's paradox, which is the more efficient you make a machine, the cheaper you make it and the more uses you find for it. So making a machine more efficient doesn't save the resource. And that's totally misunderstood by everybody who calls for more efficiency in our trucks or automobiles or whatever. You make it more efficient, you make it cheaper, and you use more resource. We'll come back to that. It's all there in his book, The Coal Question. Marvelous, marvelous book. Now, in fact, this is what's happened. Here was Jevons back here, 1855. In fact, this happened, like he said, and then we've come down. And this is known as basically a Hubbard curve for a resource. It goes up, reaches a peak, and goes down. As we made steam engines more efficient to save fuel, they became cheaper, and so people found more uses for them, and fuel consumption increased. So, as we increase the efficiency of refrigerators, people make bigger ones. As we insulate our houses more, people buy more square feet, so the energy use of a house barely changes. As we make our cars more efficient, people drive more miles. All Jevon's paradox. Okay, now next came along, the next fossil fuel is petroleum. Here's petroleum geology in 3 minutes, thanks to Colin Campbell. You have to have extreme global warming, which we had 100 and 150 million years ago, or 1,950 million years ago, and you got to be in a warm area where the water stratifies. You grow a lot of phytoplankton, and it drops to the bottom, and the trick is it's got to be warm or hot. The water at the surface has to be less dense than the deep water so it does not mix. So if you remember diving as a kid deep into a lake, you hit the thermocline. Well, in temperate regions, the water mixes in the winter. It's all the same temperature. Tropical lakes, the thermocline is permanent. All the oxygen gets used up. It's anaerobic. The organic matter accumulates over millions of years. This kind of graben, this hole, occurs where continents are drifting apart. A classic case is between Iceland and Scotland. It made the North Sea, and that's where the North Sea oil came from. And then the rains come and fill the rifts that used to be the lake with sediment. You get 2 miles of sediment, and you convert the organic debris into oil. You pressure cook that organic matter, and if you're lucky, the net result is oil. And then you get an oil field 2 miles deep, roughly, which is the point is you got to get the right temperature. And you get oil, and if you overcook oil, you get gas, and underneath it is water because all of these are migrating up through the sediments until they have a seal. And this is a typical traditional oil field. Supposedly, this was the first one, Drake's Well in Pennsylvania. Actually, it was not. It was in Ontario, Oil Springs, Ontario, Western Ontario. And this was the father of the oil industry, James Miller Williams. And they drilled by jumping on this step. And I actually did this on this. They had one of these old things still there. And the chain would go down to a spud. And you see there's some pipes there lying. And you jump up and down on this for quite a few days, and you drill a hole in the ground, and the oil would come out. And it made Fairbank was one of the first guy to do this, and they became quite wealthy from this early oil field. And this was Ontario in 1860. And this is my friend Charlie Fairbank, fourth generation of this. Here he is, the actual guy, and he's out in this oil field that he's been pumping oil from. His family's been pumping oil from for 4 generations. And see these old, they're like the nodding donkeys that you see in a modern oil field, although these are very primitive forms of that, but they work. And they're still pumping oil, not much. It doesn't get very much, but the oil sells for a lot. And these are some of the old oil derricks. And that's how the oil started. A pattern of use over time. I've showed you that, how much energy we've increased. Fossil energy generated wealth, and often much more widely distributed wealth, as this is the wealth of the world, the dotted line. This is the on the bottom coal, crude oil, natural gas. This is nuclear. So fossil fuels, when I started studying this back in 1970, fossil fuels were 80% of our energy use, and today they're 82%, even with the great growth of the renewables. And it's true for Africa, Asia, everywhere. Use of energy, and this is fossil energy, is enormously expanded. To give you an idea what this means, here is a 33 horsepower harvester. 5 guys running it. This is a 200 horsepower harvester. You can do a lot more work, 7 times more work with this than with this, with 1/5 the labor, not counting the stable boys and growing the food for the horses and so forth. So made us much, much richer. Well spread from the few to the many sometimes. The basis for wealth changed from land to factories, which you can read about in Jane Austen's. She's just, her heroines and heroes are all impacted by this wealth changes. GDP per capita in England. And I'm going to just end here that it used to take about, this is the proportion of GDP, this is in economic terms, this is the percentage of GDP that's spent on energy. So going back to 1300, so they've done really, really clever studies of these going way back, and it used to be that about half of all human activity was to get the energy to run the rest of society. But starting with coal, went down to about 25%, and then with oil down to 5 or 10% of the total energy is used to get energy. And this is leading us now to a consideration of the energy return on investment, my claim to fame, how much energy is used to get the next barrel of oil. And the population has increased enormously, our energy use has increased enormously, and our impact on the world has increased enormously. And I'm going to stop and ask for questions. Let's see. My hand is up. I don't know why. No questions? Come on.
How does recycling and using landfill, the fumes from landfills play out in all of that?
Well, landfill is a dump. Landfill by itself just means taking our waste. And my God, we just had green and blue bin day, and the waste produced by my small household in 2 weeks blew me away. But the waste is principally buried, out of sight, out of mind. That's basically what humans do with their waste, or dump it into the river or the ocean. It's an enormous amount of waste in what's called the Pacific Gyre in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, mostly plastic, which is a big problem. Now, recycling means we're going to do something with the waste instead of simply throwing it away. And obviously, if it takes a lot of energy to mine copper and you throw away an automobile, there's a lot of copper in that automobile. It would be good to get that copper and recycle it, use it again. Perfectly good copper. An element is an element. Of course, you have to purify it, and that takes a lot of energy. So we can recycle steel in the bodies of our car, but I've seen something better. Well, it's related, but I've seen something better. 20% of our waste is plastic. Plastic is oil. Oil has energy. In Syracuse, New York, where I used to live, a company called Covanta would take the waste, all the waste from Syracuse and the surrounding counties, truck it into a central place, dump it into this enormous building, which had, like grabbers that could move stuff around, like you'd pick up the bunnies at the county fair, and but very much larger. And they put all the waste into this giant room, which was kept at a hot temperature to dry out the waste. Now, that waste was 20% plastic and maybe, I don't know, 30% paper or something like that, but it's burnable. And they would burn it. And they would produce enough electricity for 77,000 homes. Now, a lot of the greenies, environmentalists, whatever they were, said, oh, you produced pollution out your smokestack, and you did. But it was pretty clean. It was, it was the latest technology. The owners were very sensitive to that. And the alternative was that we would otherwise produce electricity from coal. That if we didn't produce that electricity from trash, we would produce it from the Cayuga station, which is a coal plant. And coal had worse stuff coming out of the chimney. And so I think if we really cared for Medford, Ashland, this region, we should put in a waste burning plant. Now that waste, once you burned all the waste, including all the plastic, and they burned it at a very, very high temperature, so it basically went back to elements, to carbon and nitrogen, whatever. And they'd have a magnet that would pull out all of the metal. Somebody lost their fork or something from the trash. And then they had some residual, and then they'd try to pull out the copper and other stuff from that also. But then they'd take the ash and send it off, and they might bury the ash then, but it would take up something like 10% of the volume of the original waste that they had previously been burying. So I think that is overwhelmingly was the best thing. And so I'm not here to advocate any particular industry, but the company is Covanta, Covanta, and it's worth looking up how they do it. They have built quite a few plants throughout eastern U.S. and Canada, and it makes the most sense to me. And in this and many other areas, I quite frankly, speaking as an ecologist, I find that the environmentalists get in the way of a logical solution to a particular environmental problem. It's be very careful being green. It's good to be green, no question, but be careful. All right, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, Rich.
Charles, let me just check. Yep, my mic's on. In the beginning of the class, you mentioned the word meme and wondered who had coined the word. It was coined by a fellow named Richard Dawkins in a book that he wrote, The Selfish Gene.
Got one of his books up there.
Yeah, The Selfish Gene is his most popular book. And in that book, he uses the word meme as an element or a piece of cultural evolution. And, excuse me. I have to take a call, sorry.
Well, when he comes back, I'm going to talk about Dawkins. Well, nobody's raising their hand, so I got a few more slides. Let me give a few more slides, and please come up with a question, somebody. Wait a minute, how do I do my share? Let's get back here.
I have a question, Charles.
Yeah, go.
You mentioned earlier on ethanol, which I think you said we're kind of forced to buy.
Yeah.
Is it true that it takes more energy to grow and process ethanol than we get out of it when we put it in our gas
equal. It depends on the geography. Let's see, Elaine, I wrote a paper on that, or David Murphy did most of the work, and I'll send you the paper, okay?
Oh, great. You'll email it to me. Okay.
Do you all have access to the previous presentations and to the PowerPoints? Has that worked?
Are you putting it on Moodle or are you emailing it to us?
I have a site that Eric, my friend Eric maintains, and I think I've mailed you the link. Does anybody remember getting it? No, what do people do who miss? People are always talking. Who?
They would prefer that I had a biopsy.
I'll take care of it.
So that they know for sure
Okay?
my reason is cancers.
Can you hear me?
I'm trying to work my way through that.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Yep.
Elaine, can you hear me?
Yes, and I'm looking through my emails to see what
Oh,
I
I
got
see.
from
Okay.
you.
I'm not too.
I'd like that paper too, if possible.
What would you like?
Oh, that paper that you're gonna send Elaine?
Yeah.
On
Elaine,
ethanol,
yeah.
on growing corn for ethanol.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay, Melissa and Elaine want that. Where's Richard? Richard, are you here? Oh, there you are. Can you do you have the skills to make a site that people can go to and get papers? No.
No, I don't do that.
Okay, let me see if I can get Eric to do that, okay? But in the meantime, I'll send Melissa and Elaine that paper,
Thank you.
okay? And it's geographic dependent. In the middle of the gradient space, going back to the last lecture, in the middle of the gradient space for corn or maize, which is Iowa and southern Wisconsin and so forth, southern Minnesota, where corn grows best, that's where they have the most alcohol facilities for automobiles. So that means they're pushing, because it's heavily subsidized by the government. That means they're pushing the making of bacon and cornflakes to the peripheral states, increasing the energy cost of our cornflakes. If you think about it, by their using the highest yield areas of maize for ethanol, they're pushing the production of cornflakes and bacon out to the periphery. I mentioned North Carolina, but to so it's all mixed up. And if you understand, if you pardon me, so much of modern economics is just bullshit that if you really understand the energy, you'll come to completely different conclusions. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what the next 3 lectures will help us do, I hope. Okay, so Elaine and Melissa. Now, anybody else have a question?
Well, Rich is back. Rich, did you want to pick up where you left off?
I didn't really have that much more to say, except that a guy who picked up on Richard Dawkins' work is another.
Oh, I wanted to say something about Dawkins.
Okay.
And if this offends anybody, I apologize in advance. But that's Dawkins was known for, especially being a very large proponent of Darwinian evolution.
Yeah.
Although he'd argue on the edges of it a little bit, but mostly that. And he had a big argument with some Anglican Christians about how the earth was formed and where we came from and all that standard stuff. And he said that for a long time in England, we had a gentleman's agreement between the clergy and science, that this is our area and this is your area, and we don't cross. And then when the men of the cloth, shall we say, and they were mostly men, came up with the idea of intelligent design, that somehow it required a watchmaker to make a watch, that the process of evolution was incapable of the power of generating so marvelous as the modern human or beetle or whatever. And Dawkins said, well, they broke down the gentleman's agreement. I mean, he was both clever and rather, kick you in the shins kind of guy. And he said that, so you've broken that barrier. So I think I have now been given license to step into your arena, into your arena. And he said, I think I know where religion came from. And Dawkins said, you think about the history of humans, I think there's been selection for a religious gene, whether or not God exists. And of course, he says, I don't think God exists, but you can think God exists. But there, nevertheless, is a selection for a gene to be religious, because if you think God is on your side in a battle, you're more likely to win. And if you're sick and you're about to die, but you think somebody praying for you is going to make a difference, you're a little more likely to hang in there and will yourself psychosomatically, which is a real thing, to survive and reproduce. So there's natural selection for a gene to be religious, whether or not God exists. I got that right, Rich?
Pretty much, except you left out a name, Daniel Dennett. Have you heard of Daniel Dennett? Daniel Dennett took the concept you were just talking about, that religion is an evolution, a mimetic evolution, and wrote a book about it.
Yeah. Now, Napoleon said, I have found that God is usually on the side that has the best artillery. So people have been debating this for some time.
It's an interesting field.
It's an interesting thing. I hope I show you very straightforwardly and with concrete examples from the earth how science can explain a great deal. Science, of course, cannot explain everything, why humans have such amazing capacity to think and to ask where they came from. And science has something to say about morality, but it requires a lot of other thought processes too. But think we gotta at least get the science right, because the scientific method is the only means I have for coming at truth. Other people might feel differently. Now, I've got a few more minutes, and I'd like to give a few more slides. May I do that?
Sure.
Well, it is 12:32.
It is 12. Oh, so we better end it. Okay, we better end it up. Any more questions for me? Now, remember, next week, I hope to be able to give my talk from where I'm camping in Northern Oregon. But if this fails, then I'm going to leave Richard with the means of giving last year's lecture. And then if that fails, we'll do something else when I return. But I don't think everything should be okay. Okay?
Thank you, Charles. This has been
Okay.
most enlightening.
One quick thing.
Max.
I'm reading a book about Lamarck, and the memes thing is interesting because memes are subject to Lamarckian inheritance. In other words, once we learn something, we can pass it on to our kids, and that speeds up evolution enormously. That's just an interesting point about evolution. So sex speeded up genetic evolution, and then Lamarck said things, organisms can change themselves by their behavior. And that was totally debunked by Darwin and people since then because it's all about DNA. But when you come to memes, those are transmissible from learning of the parents or inventions and so forth. So it's cultural evolution is all Lamarckian. That's worth
Well, the
knowing.
question is, can cultural evolution change our genetic makeup? And there's the fundamental answer is no, but not quite no.
Right. Yeah. It's about gene
Because I
expression.
think if you
I haven't got to
learn
that chapter yet.
behaviors that will make your genome more likely to survive, then that cultural evolution will end up with genetic evolution. I can think of a way that that might be possible.
Sure. If the meme helps your genes survive, then it affects your natural selection.
So I'm not sure I understand what we're talking about when we say meme.
Meme is a cultural gene.
An idea that's transmitted.
Yeah, it's just an idea. Agriculture is memes. We haven't changed genetically. We haven't turned our left hand into a shovel and our right hand into a rake, but we've learned how to make shovels and rakes and plant seeds. So that's a cultural evolution, but not a genetic evolution.
So the word has been stolen and used for little things that we get on our computers. That's what I know as a meme, is the little short thing that
That
I
Yeah,
don't
the
know about
pictures,
that.
the
expresses an idea.
pictograms.
Yes, thank
But
you.
in the end, it's the same. You know, you have whatever, a picture of a cat, it's distributed, and we have the same patterns as an evolution. You have variety. So one guy draws a cat with a hat, the other guy draws a cat with glasses. It's spread around, and then there's selection. People like the cat with the hat better than with the glasses, and then this spreads, and then there's again variation. So these ideas follow the same patterns as genetic evolution, and they just spread and evolve over time. And any idea that, I mean, even the scientific process is basically helping evolution of ideas, memes. And I think Dawkins used the meme as like the smallest, how you say, atom, like the smallest part of an idea or something. So I think it's really interesting. And I don't know, maybe memes or culture is more like epigenetics, like it's a layer on top of the natural selection, right? And it allows us much more freedom, degrees of freedom to react to the environment much faster than any other animal can ever do. So I think it's really powerful.
Thanks for
Well,
that.
if anybody wants to leave, leave. Anybody wants to stay, stay. Richard, what do you have to say?
Just a quick comment that memes are basically what happens when you're on the internet and you like something. And the more likes something gets, the more likely it is to be showing up. So in essence, there's a selection process there.
Christian understood what you said. I didn't. Could you say it again?
Well, when you select something by liking it on the internet, it's more likely to show up in the future. And the more likes that something gets, the more likely that the internet.
So there's a natural selection for ideas on the computer.
It's an algorithm, which is just a way of selecting how many likes something gets. Yeah. So in a sense, natural selection is like an algorithm. It's if you get a lot
but like evolution itself, it can go down a blind alley because people are getting siloed. They only listen to channels or whatever you call them. They only go to the sites on their screens that are in agreement with their predetermined political views instead of getting hearing all sides of an argument. And so it's like some organisms are supposed to have Irish elk as the classic example, that have they were selected for bigger and bigger antlers because the females liked the males with the big antlers until they they couldn't run through the forest with their big antlers or whatever, and they went extinct. And so I don't know where it leads us. It doesn't necessarily lead us to a good assessment of the situation.
Just like in natural evolution, some memes die out. Most animals die out when they're not fit for whatever the environment. And I mean, you could say that certain memes, information, leads to the distinction of the people who use it. Like, okay, the Romans used lead, like lead pipes and lead cups. So if that meme is transmitted, right, you think lead is good, you die out, and the meme with you, the piece of information. But if the information helps you survive, like you said, with the agriculture and everything. So
well, or aggression served groups of humans well, I suppose, until somebody invents a nuclear bomb, and then it was all it's called a social trap. And I know some people who've studied, something that makes sense in the short run often doesn't make running sense in the long run. And boy, you can see that happening in the news today. Uh, Different people are negotiating for short run advantage, then it turns into a longer run disadvantage. And I even hear in the current Iranian thing, I hear newscasters talk about it that way, that both sides are backing themselves in a particular corner with something that's a short-term gain, they think, that turns out not to be a long-term gain. I've heard a number of newscasters talk about that these days, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the key argument of Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker. There's a watchmaker who can make fantastic watches, but there's no direction. There's evolution, there's
Round and
randomness,
round.
there's variety. The watchmaker is blind, doesn't have a direction, doesn't care for long term. It's only short term, right?
Well, you look at the layers of in the geological record. You can stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon and you can see pretty much the whole history of the Earth there, and humanity is just a little bit of it. So, but here we are, and let's make to me, the fantastic thing is, they took the biggest Earth telescope and they found a spot in the sky that was absolutely empty. And then they had the Hubble orbiting telescope look at that spot, and it found billions of galaxies. And who knows? And then you look at the geological time in the Grand Canyon, and then this little bit of time, and so amazing to be at this place in the universe where life is possible and thinking life. We're the only people who understand this stuff. Everybody else is, or everything else is that stuff. It's all over the place and has been there for time and time and time. But we have this remarkable ability to understand it until we blow ourselves apart or whatever we do. And that's just remarkable in space time. In Einstein's space time, this tiny, tiny dot. But here we are, and we can have this class. And you probably understand these things better than 90% of the people, 99.9999% of the people on the planet. Think of what a tiny universe you live in. Okay, see you next week, or I hope to see you next week, and if not, Richard will. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Have fun camping.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Richard, are you still there?
I am.
I'm gonna send you stuff,
Yeah,
and then we might need to have. Can you send me your phone number?
sure.
Yeah, and then we'll just get the stuff sorted out as best we can.
Okay. Well, you've got my email.
You got to remind me to make sure I get Eric's stuff available to everybody.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to do it in the next X number of minutes, but
Yeah, I will do that right now. As soon as we sign off, I'll send you my contact information.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard.